Hello, everybody. Welcome on the French Weekend Crew. I hope you have spent a nice week, and we are here on the weekend. So we are here tonight because it's been a while that I would like to make a show about Jack the Ripper, but by myself, no. I'm not so knowledgeable about the subject, and that's why I was wonder, and it was easy to find. I was wonder who is the best talking about Jack the Ripper, and it, it was really easy to find. It was Ned. So I'm here with Ned. Ned, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing just fine. Thank you for having me, Jerome.
And thank you for accepting my invitation. Thank you very much. So, like I said, you talk often on BBOR about Jack the Ripper every week, and I have learn a lot, but for me, let's say I know the basics of of the of the story. So I know it was in 1888 in London. On my understanding, to put the place in situation, to be in situation at the time. Uh, I, on my understanding, London was really divided by a line, invisible line on the west and on the east. Uh, I think on the east, people, let's say the native British, was living there, and on the west, there was a lot of poor people, a lot of Irish, Jewish, and Polish people, and these people were really poor. It was really dangerous at the time. People were starving, death, um, a lot of criminalities, a lot of thieves, a lot of, and it's where Jack the Ripper happened. So it was not a nice place to be at the time, and on my understanding, there were five victims, uh, maybe six, because I see that it was possible there was one victim before, 2 years before. Uh, Tell me if I'm wrong, but um, and I'm really excited to talk about the subject with you. And so I give you the mic, and let's start.
Okay, well, my name is Ned DeHaan, and I'm the host of Black Box Online Radio. Every Wednesday, I do a segment about Jack the Ripper called Ripper Wednesday. And yes, giving a shout out to Drew Beeson, who's here in the chat. He says, Hi, Jerome and Ned. Hi to you too, Drew
I drew.
Beeson. And Ripper Wednesday is also available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get your podcasts. Black Box Online Radio's whole show is over there under the names Black Box True Crime and Black Box Podcast. Okay, so if we want to do just sort of a basic introduction about Jack the Ripper, Jack the Ripper was a serial killer who operated in England in 1888. And there's a very small concentration of activity that has been more or less definitively attributed to Jack the Ripper. And Jerome even gave me some homework, sent me a couple documentaries to watch. One of them was the Murder Maps episode. The other one had such a big title, Jerome. What was it called? Distinctly conclusive pieces of evidence.
Yeah, yes, something like that. Yeah.
It was a very big one, but it focused a lot on the Jack the Ripper suspect, Aaron Kosminski, that we will be hopefully talking about later on in this episode. Now, as far as where the Whitechapel murders begin, it is generally accepted that the Whitechapel murders begin in the spring of 1888 with the murder of Emma Elizabeth Smith. But even in the documentaries that I was just watching prior to the start of this episode, they often leave out certain key pieces of evidence or elements to the story. And we have to go all the way back to November of 1887 when we have the murder of Emily Horsnell in England. And she's more or less attacked by a street gang, or at the very least, multiple attackers, and she passes away from her injuries later on. Then this is where the story gets a little bit weird, and we'll see that there's some questionable things about what really happened. In December of 1887, we have the possible murder of Fairy Fay, which occurred on December 26th of 1887. Now, did that even happen? As I've done on Black Box Online Radio, and I looked at the story of Fairy Fay, it's almost widely accepted that Fairy Fay was a combination of two different stories put together. On December 8th of 1887, a woman named Margaret Hayes was attacked but not murdered. She spent 20 days in the infirmary, and she was released on December 28th of 1887. So December 26th, December 28th, it's almost as if someone took that element of the story and they took elements of the story of Emma Elizabeth Smith, the first Whitechapel victim, and they combined them together and they created this borderline fictitious story about the murder of Fairy Fay. Then we go into 1888, and in February of that year, we have the attack on Annie Millwood. And we don't even know what happened with this situation. Again, Annie Millwood had lacerations to her lower body, and was this Jack the Ripper? Well, it could have been, but what's more noticeable about that is some people doubted the story, and they thought that Annie Millwood may have self inflicted the wounds, that she might not have even been attacked by a man at all. But she goes on to pass away about a month later, in March of 1888, due to natural causes. And I would cite Paul Begg's analysis on this in his book, Jack the Ripper, The Facts, when he says that she most likely passed away from a ruptured pulmonary artery and a variant of a bleeding ulcer. So then we have the murder of Emma Smith. And again, Emma Smith is attacked by multiple people. So she reported. She was also sexually assaulted, penetrated with a foreign object. Terrible, terrible. But this really becomes quite different than what Jack the Ripper would be doing in later on in this year. Now, perhaps you were referring to the murder of Martha Tabram, which occurred in early August of 1888. That's the one that you think might be included
Yeah.
in canonical victims. Martha Tabram was stabbed 39 times. And Jerome, this is one incident when I had a very big reversal in the Ripper case. When I first looked at this story of Jack the Ripper, and I'm
Yeah.
just looking at the stories of the Ripper victims that occurred in the Autumn of Terror, they were mutilated, disemboweled, they're having their organs ripped out and cut out, they're having their faces cut apart in some of the incidents, at least with Catherine Eddowes and Mary Kelly. When I
Yeah.
just heard that Martha Tabram was stabbed 39 times, I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. That's a murder. That's a tragedy. But that's a completely different type of crime. This is just looked like some opportunistic individual who murdered her. However, the big reversal that I had, that a lot of people who follow the Ripper case have, is that they begin to heavily, heavily consider the likelihood that Martha Tabram could have been a victim of Jack the Ripper for the following reason. With the Ripper's crimes, we see a very clear escalation in physical violence.
Yeah.
Hypothetically, Martha Tabram is stabbed 39 times. Then, on August 31st of 1888, we have the murder of Polly Nichols, who is mutilated, but not as severely as the other Ripper victims. And it's
Yeah.
possible that the Ripper wanted to mutilate her body more extensively, but he was either interrupted by somebody named Charles Lechmere, who was walking toward the scene just on his way to work, or, as some people would say, he was interrupted by a man named Robert Paul, who was also just walking toward the scene of the crime purely by chance, and they interrupted the activities of the Ripper, and that scared him, and he ran away. Then we have the murder of Annie Chapman, and the mutilations are much more severe. This is going into early September of 1888. And there's a very small time gap from the murders of Polly Nichols to Annie Chapman. It's really only about 8 or 9 days, and that's a concentration of activity. But with Annie Chapman, not only is the Ripper starting to mutilate her body, he is successful. He pulls out her intestines, throws it over the shoulder, he cuts out her uterus and removes it. Horrible, disgusting.
Horrible. Yeah.
But then the Ripper is mostly quiet for about 3 weeks, except at the end of September in 1888, September 27th, we have the first letter that truly gives Jack the Ripper his namesake, and that's the Dear Boss letter that was mailed to the Central News Agency that talks about how he's taking credit for the murder. He says he wanted to write the letter in blood, but it went thick like glue, so red ink will have to do. And he signs it Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
Okay, then we have the double event on September 30th of 1888, where two women were murdered in one night. The first was Liz Stride, who had her throat cut, but her body was not mutilated. I had another big reversal about this. This was perhaps the first individual story about Jack the Ripper that I ever did on Black Box Online Radio. When I was like, whoa, 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 let's look at these crimes. The Ripper's victims were mutilated. Liz Stride was not. The Ripper's victims were murdered in different parts of town. Liz Stride's on the other side of Whitechapel Road. All these things indicated to me that she wasn't actually a victim of Jack the Ripper, and it appears that there is somewhat of an urban myth out there that she was murdered with a smaller, rounded edge knife, and the Ripper was using a longer, pointed edge knife with the other victims. I think that that is a little bit of a couple misapprehensions put together. But Liz Stride is murdered, and what people think is that the Ripper wanted to mutilate her. But he was interrupted by a horse and cart going by that was driven by a man named Louis Deemshoots.
Yeah.
And then he hid in the shadows, and then he ran away and headed toward Mitre Square in London, where Catherine Eddowes was murdered shortly after. It's a very short amount of time. Some people think there might have been about 15 minutes from leaving the scene of the Stride murder and arriving at like a place where he could have met Catherine Eddowes. Now, when did the actual conversation start? Still part of the mystery. But Catherine Eddowes is mutilated extensively, and as I said, escalations in physical violence.
Yeah.
We have her face is now cut apart, and the Ripper didn't do this to the previous victims, but also her intestines are pulled out, thrown over the shoulder, and the Ripper cut out her kidney and stole it. But after the murder of Catherine Eddowes, we have somebody writing a message on a wall called the Goulston Street Graffito that said something to the effect of, "The Jews are not the men that will be blamed for nothing." Something like that. And this distinctive evidence documentary that you sent to me had some really good info on the Goulston Street Graffito, some really good hypotheses that we can talk about later on. But there's also an apron that was dropped nearby that belonged to Catherine Eddowes that had blood on it. Next point. The Ripper is going to take credit for this with the Saucy Jackie postcard that famously calls this a double event, saying double event tonight, and now he's calling himself Saucy Jackie. We go all the way to November 9th of 1888, and then the Ripper would commit the murder of Mary Kelly, the most vicious murder to ever take place. I mean, we probably don't have to go through all of the things that the Ripper did to Mary Kelly. He cut her legs down to the bone and he peeled the flesh away. He completely mutilated her face, and he took out other organs and put them under her body. But most famously, it's possible that the Ripper stole her heart, that he cut out her heart and he took that with him. And Mary Kelly was murdered indoors, and the other Ripper victims were murdered
Yeah.
outdoors. Because Mary Kelly, I mean, this is just, again, a hypothesis, but Mary Kelly was able to rent her own room, whereas the other women that I've been talking about stayed in guest houses, and they had to pay
Yeah.
what was called DOS money. And they had to, just pay regularly. And sometimes they would even sleep on the streets. And an easy way to do that would be by getting drunk on gin, because that's what was available at the time. And Whitechapel had cheap booze. The Murder Maps documentary used those words very
Yeah.
nicely. But with Mary Kelly, she had her own room for rent, and the Ripper just committed this absolutely heinous crime. And then possibly the murder stopped, or possibly they kept going. So that's my nutshell version of Jack the Ripper.
Excellent introduction. Excellent. Uh, yeah, there is a lot of similarity with the Zodiac, but when I when I see that, there is a lot of similarity, except the fact that the Zodiac was not so so much horrible than Jack the Ripper. So I have my first question who comes from in my mind is, let's talk about the first victim. What do we know about her?
Are you asking about Polly Nichols
Yeah,
or
Polly Nichols.
Polly Nichols?
Yeah,
Well,
Polly
with
Nichols.
Polly Nichols, it appears that she had a family at one point, and was it 5 children that she had? But she had separated from her husband. And the
Yeah,
story about her is that she had to pay the DOS money to stay in a guest house, and she earned the money 3 times that day. but she had spent it on booze. So she
Yes.
decided to go out on the street to try and earn it again. And in the Murder Maps documentary that I was just watching, it featured an individual named Hallie Rubenhold, who was the author of the book The Five. And she was reporting that her overall thesis is that not all of the women who were victims of the Whitechapel murders were prostitutes. It's almost just people jumping to conclusions or assuming that they were. Although she
Yeah.
does admit that Mary Kelly was a prostitute, and she says that Liz Stride was a prostitute, although she was most likely not working on the night that she was murdered. People will dispute this narrative of the five very, very frequently. They think it's revisionist history, or it's just kind of someone not really wanting to look at the unflattering side of the situation. But in all seriousness, Jerome, I don't think there's anything unflattering about it. No matter what the
No.
women were doing outside, they didn't deserve to be murdered. I
No.
mean,
Not at
and
all. No.
I've also closely followed the Long Island serial killer on Black Box Online Radio.
Yeah.
A lot of those women were prostitutes,
Yeah.
but again, they don't deserve to be murdered. And
Oh
you know,
no.
it's just
In plus, it was not a first choice. It was not they chose to do that. They was obliged to do that to have a roof and have a meal, and
hard time.
it was
Yes.
not by their own decision. It was it was because it was, yeah. So
So Polly Nichols is out on the street, and at some point in the early AM hours, she's attacked by Jack the Ripper. And this is the stuff that people just have to ask the question of: how was the Ripper able to get away with this? Now, if you ask people like Edward Stowe and Christopher Holmgren, who think that Charles Lechmere was Jack the Ripper, the man who found Polly Nichols' body, they would just
yeah,
say, well, he got away with it because he put on this act where he was pretending to be a witness, and then he pretended like he had discovered the body when the other witness, Robert Paul, arrived. Whereas other people just think that the Ripper may have just run away very quickly. He ran away very quickly into the shadows. He was sneaking around. Maybe he was a Whitechapel resident, very familiar with the back alleys and the little passageways, and he knew how to get around. So, I mean, I think there's definitely evidence to support that. And in that first documentary that you sent me, they're even putting forward the theory that the Ripper was just lucky, that he was
yeah,
lucky not to be interrupted at the murder of Polly Nichols or the murder of Annie Chapman. Now, he was interrupted at the murder of Liz Stride, but he was able to hide, perhaps. This is all alleged, right? And then, not to jump ahead too much, we've done Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman. With Liz Stride, there are multiple witnesses who saw someone who could have been the Ripper. Not
yeah.
enough to make a composite sketch.
No,
As I understand, there are no definitive composite sketches of Jack the Ripper, but there are multiple witnesses who actually saw the Ripper that night, even in Mitre Square as well, with the murder of Catherine Eddowes. But they were Jewish. And this is one thing that I felt was a little bit misrepresented in the Distinctive Fact documentary when they said that, oh, maybe the Jewish person didn't want to testify against another Jewish man because he thought that he saw the Ripper and the Ripper looked like he was Jewish. Well, when I interviewed Richard Patterson, author of Jack the Ripper, The Works of Francis Thompson, he presented that information in a different way when he said that it's not just that they don't want to, it's the Hasidic Jewish law that you cannot have one man testify against another man. You need two witnesses who have seen the same event happen, and then the two witnesses have to agree, and then they can testify. So that I felt was a little bit left out. But also, about this thing about just being lucky, one
yeah,
possibility is that they think that one of the witnesses may have been a direct relation to the Ripper. Maybe he actually recognized this person and he was his cousin. And the exact ones that I'm thinking about are Jacob Levy, a Jack the Ripper suspect, and a witness named Joseph Hyam Levy, and could be a relation. And another thing that the Distinctive Fact documentary shared was that after the Ripper leaves Catherine Eddowes, it's possible he cut his hand actually, and he wraps the apron on his hand because he's trying to stop his own blood, and he drops an
yeah,
apron by a wall. And he chose to stop at that wall because if your suspect is Jacob Levy, his former employer who had terminated him worked in that building, so he recognized the building. And He just wrote something nasty out of a personal vendetta. Now, I mean, it's an unsolved case, and as you're going to see, I don't have a single Jack the Ripper suspect, but
No.
I definitely think about maybe three or four of them. Which in the Zodiac case, I do not. I don't have anyone.
I would like to know if the first crime was reported in the press.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
This is one thing that was very shocking to me because like when I was a teenager or something, even in my early 20s, I was thinking, how widely did the newspapers share the story of Jack the Ripper? And as soon as I started looking into the Jack the Ripper case, I learned that even the murder of Polly Nichols, the first crime, was heavily reported on. And they do things like having an inquest, and reporters go to the inquest, very widely reported on. And yes, a lot of coverage went into the murder of Polly Nichols.
Yeah, yeah. And in the same times, in their mind, it's better to have a good story than an accurate story. So that's the thing with the press. So, and what do you think about? Because I don't know. What do you think about the police at the time? What they've done to try to solve this case in particular? They've
Well,
tried to find somebody, or what do you think? What's your thought about that?
Well, the police definitely looked into individuals. The police had suspects. They investigated suspects. One of the
Yeah.
most famous is named John Pizer, who is also referred to as Leather Apron, and he's very publicly examined. And another one is Aaron Kosminski, who came under an enormous amount of police suspicion. And I guess then the first documentary that you sent to me, the Distinctive Fact one, was simply stating that they more or less came to the conclusion that, all right, this Jack the Ripper case, the world's most famous unsolved mystery, it's not really a mystery. Jack the Ripper was a Polish barber named Aaron Kosminski. He was 23 years old at the time. And, like some things about him. When he's referred to as a barber, yes, he's a barber. He cuts hair and beards, and he also is a hairstylist. But barbers had minimal understandings of surgery. Even as an American, when I'm watching the old westerns, like when I was a kid growing up, they need to get their arms stitched up because they got a cut on
Yeah.
their arm. So where do they go? They go to the barber because the barber is the person who knew how to do things like that. So that shows a little bit of medical knowledge and a little bit of medical understanding. But Jerome, between you and me, as far as just looking at a suspect like Aaron Kosminski and saying, oh, well, he was the prime suspect at the time, so clearly, that means they know who the Ripper was. They just didn't have the evidence to convict him. That does not work in true crime cases.
No,
If you're
no.
going to go to the Zodiac Killer mystery and just say, well, clearly the Zodiac Killer was Arthur Lee Allen, it's just they didn't have the evidence to convict him. A better example, I told you about the Long Island serial killer mystery. I read this very brilliant article, detailed article talking about how the Long Island serial killer has been identified. His name was John Bitroff, who was the most widely discussed suspect online in the past. The authorities know who it is. His name was John Bitroff. He's a murderer, but they just didn't have the evidence to convict him. And the person is so good at expressing their opinion about why this. And you come away from that thinking, maybe they're right. No. It turns out the Long Island serial killer is somebody named Rex Heuermann, an architect, completely different person. So it's just impractical thinking to say this narrative that the police had a prime suspect, they just didn't have the evidence to convict him, therefore he was the killer. It doesn't work all the time.
No.
Maybe it's theoretically possible, but it's jumping to conclusions. And I
Yeah.
will, just looking at all of these unsolved mysteries, even the Phantom Killer case, we see this with an individual named Yul Swinney, who is the prime suspect. So they're like, yeah, obviously it was him. They just didn't have the evidence. It's a tired narrative that has been recycled for 136 years. Now, the police did try. The police did look into this. Yes, they were trying. But think about the points that I've just said before. Number one, the Ripper was extremely lucky. Number
Yeah.
two, the Ripper knew his way around London and Whitechapel. And number three, maybe somebody covered for him. That one is a little bit more speculative on my part, but the first two, I think, are very, very likely.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to say hi to people in the chat. Hi, Voodoo Baby. Hi, Jeff Jones. Thank you for your donation. Um, Thank you to Yolo.
Yalla
Yala Yo.
YOLO.
Yeah.
Hey, hello to you too, Yalla YOLO.
Hello. Thank you very much for joining us. It's really nice. And I would like to say thank you very much to all new subscriber. Uh, Now we have, I think, 1,200 subscriber, and that's really great. Thank you very much for everything. So
Yes, congratulations, Rome. Your channel is really expanding, over the last 2 months, and
yeah,
keep it up.
yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So we can maybe let's jump to the second victim.
Certainly, with the murder of Annie Chapman, it becomes clear that the Ripper had this type of fascination with mutilating the victim's
Yeah,
bodies. And a big commonality between the murders of Polly Nichols and Annie Chapman is that their throats were slit, and it also appeared that the Ripper was asphyxiating them to a certain extent. And
yeah,
this is beneficial to the Ripper's advantage because if the victims had been strangled first, then their hearts would stop pumping. So when their throats were slit, they would bleed out, but not extensively. There would
yeah.
not be the arterial spray. But what we see from the murder of Annie Chapman is the Ripper is committing these mutilations post mortem.
Yeah.
He's really doing this as a way to make himself feel a certain way, and he's not trying to do this for sadistic reasons. Was Jack the Ripper a sadist? Absolutely. But the mutilations that occurred were not done for sadistic reasons. I think
No,
somebody said it best once when they were like, a serial killer is always a sadist unless they're completely painlessly doing it to the victim. Then there's almost always a little bit of a sadistic element. But the Ripper's mutilations to the women were mostly done, as people believe, for some type of sexual gratification. He experienced a type of arousal, elation, stimulation from cutting the women's bodies apart and taking their organs. He's taken stuff like the uterus, the kidney, the heart. That just makes me believe that he hated his mother, but I don't, you can't really bank everything on those types of observations
no,
because
no.
they're very, very abstract. But you definitely think about it with multiple victims, he cut out their uteruses, something feminine going on there.
Yeah, yeah. It's very, very disgusting and strange, and yeah. And this crime occurred how many time after the first?
Oh, how many days was it?
Yeah, how
The
many days?
murder of Andrew Chapman was not August, excuse me, September 8th of 1888, and Polly Nichols was murdered on August 31st. So about 8 or 9 days.
Oh, okay. And the police was continuing to watching about a suspect in the first crime, and the second crime occurred. They did the relation. Um, they did the yeah, the relation between the two victims, thinking it was the same perpetrator. Or yeah,
At this
directly.
point, it became pretty clear that there was a single perpetrator. There was a theory that this was a gang of individuals, and this is like the London street gang that is
Yeah,
attacking the women. But like based on all the similarities that I said between the murders of Polly Nichols and Annie Chapman, it seems like it was the same killer. And this is also when people begin to hypothesize and theorize about
I am.
the creation of the Ripper persona. But if you want to talk about the letters, we can do that later on. If you want to go through the victims first.
Oh, like you want.
Well, after the murder of Annie Chapman is when we get the first letter, the Dear Boss letter. Now, there is a possible letter that came on September 17th of 1888, but unconfirmed.
Do,
With
do you
the
do
Dear
you
Boss
think that
letter,
the do you think the divorce letter is coming from Jack the Ripper?
no, I don't. I
No.
don't believe that any of the letters were written by
Any
the
of any of one? No.
Zero.
Zero. Okay.
Now, here are some of the reasons why. We have the Dear Boss letter, which is mailed at the end of September 1888 to the Central News Agency. And I cite Richard Jones of Jack the Ripper Tour for all of this. This is his analysis. The letter is mailed to to the Central News Agency. And this showed that someone may have had a high understanding of how the newspapers and the media in the country worked. Because instead of mailing it to a newspaper, they mailed it to the news agency. If you mailed it to the newspaper, you would get local coverage. But by mailing it to the Central News Agency, it went out on the wire and the story got national coverage, hence the
Yeah.
more famous image of Jack the Ripper that has been created. And that's only one possible reason. And then you also have publications like The Star, where Frederick Best worked. And The Star was a publication that really benefited from the stories of the crimes, writing sensational pieces. And in the Murder Maps documentary that you sent me, there was even somebody talking about how, oh, at the time in 1888, there was this insatiable appetite for sensational crime stories. That's not only 1888. Oof. That is
No.
2024 as
It's,
well. When you got
yeah.
Court
It's all the
TV,
time.
you got the Law and Crime Network, you've got, Nancy Grace, and they present the stories in a very loud and dramatic way. And they really do things to get the attention of the viewers and hook people in. Even if you go back to the 90s and the O.J. Simpson trial, that's another very good 20th century example of a loud and sensational crime story that people still do not let go to this day. But as far as just having some understandings of how the newspaper works, I think it's not even that I think this. The two most widely discussed suspects for fabricating the Dear Boss letter as part of some type of hoax would be Thomas Bowling, who worked for the Central News Agency, and Frederick Best, the journalist who worked for the Star. And it has allegedly been reported that Frederick Best confessed to this in 1931, although it's not like we have some type of video camera recording him when he was saying that.
No.
But he confessed to fabricating the Dear Boss letter and the second communication, the Saucy Jackie postcard. And the reason for that would be that it was done to sell newspapers, to drive up the business of the Star. And in one variant of the story, it even says to save the newspaper.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that's really horrible. The crime are really horrible. And yeah, let's jump to the third crime, who
Sure.
occurred how many times after the how many times after the
This would
second
be about
crime?
22 days because we're going from
Okay. Yeah.
August, I keep saying August,
No,
September 8th to
September.
September 30th with the murders of Liz Stride and Catherine Eddowes. September 30th was the night of the double
Yeah,
event.
it was a double homicide. Yeah.
Now, Liz Stride is out on the street, and this is when she is possibly seen with the Ripper by multiple people, one of which is Israel Schwartz. And Israel Schwartz is one of the key witnesses, but again, he was Jewish, and he also didn't speak fluent English, as has been reported. He was a Hungarian Jew who spoke Hungarian and Yiddish, although there's at least one census document that states that he was Polish, but I mean, it's kind of widely accepted now that he was Hungarian. But again, there's that issue with the Hasidic Jewish law that even if he did get a good look at the man, he wouldn't testify against him because of, those reasons that we've laid out.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, after, or let's just say, around the time of the murder of Liz Stride, someone shouts out the word Lipsky. And Lipsky is a racial slur against Jewish people, anti Semitic slur, I should say.
Yeah.
And this goes back to 1887 with the murder of Miriam Angel, which was committed by a man named Israel Lipsky. And it was another widely publicized story. These stories received a lot of media attention. And here's something else, Jerome. In the 1800s and early 1900s, not only were the stories shared by the newspapers, people would share things through gossip at monumental proportions. They didn't have the internet. They didn't
No.
even have like electronic devices. And we've already talked about the poverty of Whitechapel. What did people do to pass the time? They would get drunk and they would share stories. And we can even see this existing very clearly in the Axeman of New Orleans case in 1912 about how not really it's the Cleaver attacks from the early 1900s, but there are the stories that are just sharing around and people are writing messages and who knows how they're obtaining this information. But, like the word Lipsky entered the common parlance in 1887, 1888 as an anti-Semitic slur. Maybe somebody was either thinking that they saw a Jewish man in the area or that they did indeed see one with Liz Stride, or maybe they got the wrong person altogether. We don't know everything
Mm.
about who they were talking about. It's just somebody shouted the word Lipsky. But then Liz Stride is attacked. As I said, her throat is cut, but she is not mutilated. And when
No.
I first read about her story, I was like, I thought there was a 10% chance that she was killed by Jack the Ripper. I thought it was a pure coincidence. Then I had a big reversal, going from 10% certain to 90% certain. And I would say I was about 90% certain. But in the Murder Maps documentary that you sent me, Jerome, I told you Hallie Rubenhold was present in that one, and she's the author of the five. And she said something that I didn't really agree with at all, actually, and that is that the people who have followed the Jack the Ripper case for over 100 years don't really think about the stories of the female victims. And I disagree with that completely because
Yeah, yeah,
even with people like Patricia Cornwell, the novelist who went on to write multiple Jack the Ripper books, she even talked about how she had this fascination with just trying to understand why the Ripper would do the things that he did to those women, thinking about the women. And I had that experience when I first learned about the murder of Liz Stride. I saw her photo in the mortuary, which is a very horrific, horrific
yeah,
photo, but I had that same experience. And multiple books have been written about Liz Stride, Jack the Ripper's third victim. There's one out by David Yost, and there's another one out that's a novel, and there's also poetry that has been written about the victims of Jack the
yeah,
Ripper. And just last week on Ripper Wednesday, I did a book discussion on The Seduction of Mary Kelly by William J. Perring, which was an attempt to write a backstory for Mary Kelly, Jack the Ripper's final victim. And there are also other books that have been written, just talking about Mary Kelly's life, The Real Mary Kelly and Jack the Ripper, A True Love Story, written by Win Weston Davies, who is Mary Kelly's great nephew. So people definitely think about the female victims in this case, and I don't really agree at all
absolutely.
that they were just kind of pushed aside. Like if you just go on Google and start Googling Jack the Ripper poetry, you'll find some things about the female victims. It definitely is present.
Yeah, yeah, and in the same time, for me, and I know it's the same for you, the most important is the victim, uh, because
Well, it
the
is
killer
very
itself
important.
is
Go
no.
ahead.
Go ahead. No, I
No,
was
no.
saying that the killer itself is a douchebag. So
Well, yes, yes, and we have one thing here from Jeff Jones in the comment section when he is saying that
yeah,
there was no other way to make money in the horrible time and economy than doing what the women might have been doing out on the streets. And this is why I don't think it's a very controversial statement to say that they may have been working as prostitutes. And as the Five even reports, Mary Kelly was a prostitute, and so was Liz Stride. But that's I mean, like I don't fault them at all for anything. It was a very very poor situation.
yeah, yeah, yeah. On my understanding, it was really a really poor situation, really poor time, and people was trying to do their best to try to live, and it was not really easy. Um, yeah, so we were talking about two victims about the same night. The second victim was
Catherine Eddowes, who was also murdered on
Catherine
September
Haddon.
30th of 1888. And this is what I said when the Ripper is kind of leaving the place in Berner Street where Liz Stride was murdered. He's leaving the scene of the Stride murder. And as I said, Louis Diemschutz is driving down with his horse and cart. And his horse just begins to shy for some reason, like moving
Yeah,
around. And sometimes it's referred to as a horse, sometimes as a pony. But interestingly, it's believed that the horse was bothered by the scent of blood. Now, there's a ripperologist out there named Randy Williams who wrote the book Sherlock Holmes in the Autumn of Terror. And he became extremely suspicious of that because he works on a horse farm in Pennsylvania. And, he's an American like me. And he works on a horse farm. And he just read that and he was like, horses don't shy at the scent of blood, according to him, because that was just something that he thought was a blatant lie. So he began investigating the case from that angle. And Louis Diemschutz goes on to become his Jack the Ripper suspect. And if anything, he says that Jack the Ripper was a team of three people, who was Louis Diemschutz, Isaac Kosabrowski, and Samuel Friedman. And these other guys, as well as with Diemschutz, were members of the International Men's Socialist Workers Club. I always
Yeah,
butcher that and get the letters out of it, but that's the building that's nearby where Liz Stride is
yeah,
murdered. And when Louis Deemshoots is taking his horse and pony down, the horse is bothered by something, and he sees a woman who's on the street on the ground, and he almost thinks it is his wife. She resembles his wife, and he actually goes into the club, and she's waiting in the kitchen, if I recall correctly, of the Socialist Workers Club. So then they go out, and much like with the other victims, especially with the murder of Polly Nichols, they don't know if she's just drunk and passed out or if she's actually injured. But it turns out she was murdered, and it's just another thing that the Ripper got away with. And it even gets frustrating at a certain point about how much the Ripper could get away
yeah,
with
yeah.
these
This kind
crimes.
of murder. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But they
And
mostly think that the Ripper was just hiding or and he snuck away. But unless, with Randy Williams' theory, Sherlock Holmes in the Autumn of Terror, it's that there was a third participant. And the two men that go back outside are Louis Deemshoots and Isaac Kosa Brodsky. And that the third participant, Samuel Friedman, made his way to Mitre Square and he murdered Catherine Eddowes. Two killers in one place. That's why it looks like a double event. And that's why the double event was created. One murder was a diversion and the other one was let's just say a setup, more
yeah,
or less. But then Catherine Eddowes is murdered, extensively mutilated, and the Ripper's done things that are escalating in violence. And again, like the distinctive fact documentaries think that the Ripper might have actually cut his hand while he was committing the mutilations of Catherine Eddowes, which is not uncommon with knife murders. I completely agree.
yeah,
And even in cases when people experience psychosis and they start, stabbing themselves, like the knife blade goes back into their hands. So that's also very normal. So they think he took Catherine Eddowes' apron and then he was just walking down his escape route and he decided to write a message on a building called the Goulston Street Graffito. Jerome, for the longest time, I did not believe that the Goulston Street Graffito had anything to do with Jack the Ripper. I thought that it was just a hoax. Like, not really a hoax. I just thought that it was already on the building. I didn't
yeah.
see any reason for the killer to write this. Jack the Ripper was not the Zodiac killer. With the
No,
Zodiac killer, he goes to Lake Berryessa and he commits the Lake Berryessa stabbing. And this is also the third night, third
yeah,
day of activity for both killers. But the Zodiac most likely wrote the message on the car door at Lake Berryessa because it contains esoteric Zodiac information. And also, he's the only one who should have been in the area at the time. But with the Ripper, he doesn't say Jack the Ripper in the Goulston Street Graffito. He says the Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing. And Jews is spelled Juwes.
yeah. It was
Although,
not the right spelling. Yeah, yeah. It was not the right spelling. Yeah,
right, although we do not have any photos of the Goulston Street Graffito because Sir Charles Warren ordered it removed. And this will become the foundations of several different theories. And I've already laid one of them out that, okay, this was already there and had nothing to do with the Ripper. Although there was a very convincing case about how this actually was indeed Ripper related. And I even felt challenged when I was watching the Distinctive Fact documentary you sent me because I was like, something was put forward is that nobody just reported it being seen earlier. Nobody came to the police and said, "Oh yeah, that was on there like 6 hours ago." The witnesses in the area saying, "I know somebody's not going to say I wrote that," but we have something from New Cokes in the chat. I'll have to get to in a second, but
Ivan.
yes, I mean, they really gave me a lot of food for thought about how Jack the Ripper did indeed write the Goulston Street Graffito. Now, the reasons why we can talk about in a second, but do you want to do this chat here from New Cokes?
Yeah. Hello, Vince. How are you doing?
Ned, who do you think is smarter, Don Chaney or Jack the Ripper? Vincent, it's a great question. I think Don Chaney was absolutely smarter than Jack the Ripper. I have not seen anything to indicate that Jack the Ripper was smart. I mean, as we've just
No,
said,
there is
number
no
one, he could have
indication.
been
No,
lucky. Number two, someone may have covered for him. Number three, running around in the shadows does not make you smart. It means
no.
he was not a complete pure psychotic who's flailing about, like a madman. It means he had a certain level of awareness in regards to what he was doing. But in terms of being smart, I haven't seen anything that the Ripper was smart. Like some people are saying, well, Jack the Ripper cut the organs out of women, like the uterus and the heart and the kidney. He must have known what he was doing. Must be an educated person. Must be a medical doctor. No,
No, not
couldn't have been
especially.
someone
No.
like a butcher, a cigar maker, a fishmonger, someone who handles a knife regularly. And out of those two, butchers and fishmongers would be familiar with cutting out organs.
Yeah,
So I don't think the Ripper was brain dead. I just don't. I've not seen anything to indicate that the Ripper was smart. And Don Chaney was a mechanical engineer, so he has that
yeah,
going for him.
yeah. It was really, really smart compared to Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, yeah. Vincent says, Ned, I'm just joking anyway. It's my new thing to claim that Don Chaney isn't very smart. Yeah, I know, but hey, New Cokes, you know that I can't resist challenge questions, so I almost always go for them.
But you can answer about that, Nat, if you want. About Don Cheney.
Oh yes, I think I covered almost everything I would say about Don Chaney. Well, I mean, if you just want to go into all the stuff about Don Chaney, mechanical engineer, ex Air Force, familiar with celestial navigation, we know those things about Don Chaney. Whereas with the Ripper, we don't even know his name.
No, we don't know anything about him.
And let me
And
provide the condition. If I don't know who the Ripper is, and I fully admit that, I maybe the Ripper was a doctor, maybe he was a medical student or something like that. It's possible. Okay,
yeah,
it's
it's possible.
possible.
Yeah.
I just I haven't been convinced of those things yet because I'm not seeing anything of high intelligence from Jack the Ripper.
And what do you think about what says John Douglas? Then when you are in this kind of true crime world, you need to put yourself in the shoes of the killer to understand what he's doing.
Oh, did John Douglas actually say that?
Yeah.
I would challenge that with a statement from Inspector Mark Rowley, who worked on the Madeline McCann case, by saying, do not put yourself into the shoes of the killer because this person is most likely thinking in a way that you are not. If this
No.
person has a psychotic disorder, if this person has some type of mental delusion that you don't experience, that just turns into the unraveling of a thinking of a madman. Now, maybe what John Douglas is talking about is you can experience a certain level of cognitive empathy with the killer. And it's not even cognitive empathy because you're not like talking about feelings. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't care about the serial killer's feelings at a certain point. You
No.
want to see them arrested first, then let the
Yeah.
legal process
Absolutely.
work itself out. But it's like, yeah, you can understand why people do the things they do. But there was something else, though, that I heard from Dr. Phil, the wonderful American TV psychologist,
Yeah. Yeah.
who said that he became a psychologist because he would observe people and he would just look at them and he said, I don't only want to know what people are doing things for. Like, I don't only want to know why people do the things they do. I also want to know what they were thinking when they did it. And me, as a true crime follower who just kind of sitting back and chilling and so on, I was like, I'm mostly more concerned on why they did the things they did. What were they thinking when they did it? That's when I would turn to Inspector Mark Rowley and just be like, maybe you can't unravel the thinking of a madman.
Yeah.
I had to
So
get one of those roosters away again.
yeah, and Vince continued.
Okay, Vincent
Drinking.
has something here when he says the problem with the Ripper is that it was so long ago. Oh, yes, Vincent, absolutely. We don't have the Ripper's DNA to the best of everybody's satisfaction. There are going to be people out there, such as Russell Edward, who is pushing the book Naming Jack the Ripper, when he talks about how there's a mitochondrial DNA match with the suspect Aaron Kosminski. Patricia Cornwell also claimed that there was a mitochondrial DNA match, but with her suspect Walter Sickert. Mitochondrial DNA does not confirm that someone was the killer.
No.
Tens of thousands of people could have had the same mitochondrial DNA. I never knew anything about this before true crime, Jerome. So I'm not a scientist. This is just stuff that I
No, me
hear
neither. No.
online, being clear about that. But it's like, yes, that evidence is not convincing. Russell Edward also claimed that there was semen DNA from the Ripper that was found on the garment worn by Catherine Eddowes. after her murder. We're talking about the fourth Ripper victim now. And if Catherine Eddowes did indeed work as a prostitute, how would he necessarily know that that was the Ripper's DNA as opposed to one of her other clients?
Yeah.
I'm not sure about that. But in
No.
terms of the letters, after the murder of Catherine Eddowes, a letter is mailed to George Lusk, the chairman of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, that contained half of a kidney that was preserved in an alcoholic solution. This is very different because the first two Ripper communications, as I said, are mailed to the Central News Agency. And the Rippers definitely tried to make his handwriting horrific, whoever wrote this letter, that is. Now, Vincent's talking about Ripper evidence so long ago. The original From Hell letter no longer exists, nor does the kidney. And the original Dear Boss letter was stolen from the police archives and anonymously returned in 1988 for the 100th anniversary. So, no DNA can be extracted. It's just too contaminated, and they wouldn't even know. Well, I mean, nothing is going to be preserved on the original Dear Boss letter, even if it still exists.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah, there is too much time. Yeah. So, at the time, the police had made the relation about the fourth victims, thinking it was the same perpetrator doing the same thing.
Oh yes, up
Yeah.
until this point, and even at a certain point, they're thinking that these letters are credible, and they actually received over a
Ah, yeah. They
thousand
were thinking
letters.
that. Yeah.
Oh, what was it? Was it Jack the Ripper 2 or JackTheRipper.org that was reporting this, that there were over 1,000 Ripper letters, and they
Who?
were all investigated. And really, there are only four that are given strong consideration. I don't even think that's true. Three get strong consideration. The
Yeah.
ones we've been talking about: the Dear
Yeah. The
Boss letter, the
divorce
Saucy Jackie
letter,
postcard,
the
and
from L
the
letter.
From Hell letter. But the From Hell letter and the Saucy Jackie postcard take credit for all four of the murders. I mean, like that's what the killer is saying. That Jack the Ripper says in the Saucy Jackie postcard, double event tonight, meaning that okay, this is the same person who wrote the Dear Boss letter, and he committed a double homicide or two murders in one night. I mean, I don't want to misuse my criminological terminology. And then with the Dear Boss letter, sorry, From Hell letter,
Yeah.
he's also taking credit for the murder of Catherine Eddowes with a kidney. And we have a couple of things here in the chat. We
Yeah.
have Colin McNaman. Am I saying your name right, Colin? And Colin says the best Jack the Ripper was one with Michael Caine. Yeah, Colin, I found that on YouTube, but it was only the part two of that. That's the part two with Michael Caine and Jane Seymour, right? And I was like,
Yeah.
I don't want to just watch part two, so I'm going to definitely track that one down. And Colin, I was really just thinking that I loved the Jack the Ripper film from 1959, and they changed the names of the victims, like Mary Kelly is referred to as Mary Clark, but that one was very well done for a 1959 movie, and it's very suspenseful. Actually, I was pleasantly surprised. I'm gonna have to watch this 1980s one with Michael Caine, and there is a Jack the Ripper film. What was it? 1965, A Study in Terror, where Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson go up against Jack the Ripper. And in that one, they use the real names of the victims and
Yeah.
everything. Yeah. That one was also fairly entertaining, but I like Sherlock Holmes.
And we also have this movie with Johnny Depp from
I've
L.
never seen it. From Hell.
No,
Have
never
you?
see it. Yeah, yeah, I see it. It's a good movie. It's entertaining, but it's not really accurate because the- about what I understand, this is not really accurate, but it's entertaining, and Johnny Depp is great in the movie. So
Okay, now Jerome, I've only read about the From Hell movie. As you can tell, I've never seen it. Does it put forward the theory that the murders were committed by Sir William Gull, and
yeah,
it was like a Masonic and royal conspiracy,
yep,
and that the final victim was chosen Mary Kelly because she was having an affair with a member of the royal family and she got pregnant. That's why the Ripper is mutilating the abdominal areas of the women and,
yeah,
like cutting out the uterus because it's trying to commit a series of unrelated murders to make it look like there's a serial killer on the loose. And there is. It's just the serial killer is doing this for a calculated reason to cover up this misdeed that would ruin the royal family's reputation. That's right.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right, and a
That's
lot of that comes from
exactly the
Stephen Knight and his book, The Final Solution, Jack the Ripper, The Final Solution, right? And this is one where it says not only is there a royal conspiracy, but it's also a Masonic conspiracy, because what the Masons do is they guard their heavily protected knowledge. And the protected knowledge is, relates to several different stories. There's a Masonic story of three ruffians who murdered the architect of King Solomon's temple. His name was Hiram Abif. And the three ruffians who killed him did so because they were like, we want the secrets of King Solomon's temple. And the Mason refused to tell the secrets. So they killed him. And then they were tracked down, caught, and captured, and they were executed. And they were executed, and their bodies were mutilated. And their names were Jubala, Jubalo, and Jubalum. And on the Goulston Street graffito, we have the word Jews spelled Juews. And then this is what some people believe is not referring to Jewish people. It's referring to
no.
Jubala, Jubalo, and Jubalum, the three ruffians. And that's why Sir Charles Warren, who was a high-ranking Mason, recognized it instantly, thinking, okay, this is a secret message that has been communicated to me. Now I need to erase that. One point where I would agree with Bruce Robinson, who wrote the book They All Love Jack, is that even if you don't have the royal conspiracy going on, maybe, just maybe, the Masonic theory has certain degrees of credibility. That's all I agree with Bruce Robinson on. I don't really like anything
And
else.
for you, what is the best book about Jack the Ripper?
It's I really haven't read enough books to truly say. Jack the Ripper: The Facts by Paul Begg is very well organized and has lots of great things. And I can more or less tell you what's going to be on my horizon. And I mean, a lot of people do like the Complete History of Jack the Ripper by Philip Sugden, although I haven't read that one yet. One book, though, that I have read that I do love is The London of Jack the Ripper by Richard Jones. And that one is not only a Jack the Ripper book, it's a history book. It's all about, the preceding material, like when I was talking about Israel Lipsky and the murder of Miriam Angel. And I have a two-part book discussion about that on Black Box Online Radio, but you can get The London of Jack the Ripper by Richard Jones online for free. Now, the things that
Oh,
are on my horizon for Black Box Online Radio are hopefully going to be going through those Win Weston Davies books because, he's a descendant of Mary Kelly, the final victim. He wrote Jack the Ripper, A True Love Story, and The Real Mary Kelly. And I'm also going to do a book discussion very soon on Peter Foreman's Jack the Ripper. And Jerome, there are so many books that have been written about the Ripper case. I'm not going to get through them all in my lifetime. And I'm 36 now. And that's how I remember that Jack the Ripper is 136 years old, because I was born in 1988. He was from 1888. I'm never going to get through all of the books. But yes,
no, no, for
also,
sure.
what's that other book that is highly recommended that's going to be on my list? Trevor Marriott's book on Jack the Ripper is one of them. Hey, but Jerome, I want to respond to this thing in the chat here. Firstly, Vincent
Yeah.
says that movie From Hell was directed by Thomas Henry Horan. Oh no. Horan jumps on the Ripper hoax theory. Yes, Thomas Henry Horan is the author of The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, and he does support the Ripper hoax theory, stating that all of these crimes were just unconnected, and they were actually murders that were committed by the London street gangs. And the final crime, the murder of Mary Kelly, was just an unrelated murder, and that was not like even a street gang because she was murdered inside. Okay, with some of the crimes, we might have some merit for that. The murder of Emily Horsnell in 1887, the murder of Emma Smith in 1888, the spring of 1888. Those crimes were most likely committed by London street gangs. Reports of multiple attackers, the woman being sexually assaulted, the whole theory that maybe they were blackmailed. Hey, you got to give us money for protection, but I don't have any money. Oh, she gets murdered and beaten to death on both instances, more or less. Although, as I said, Emma Smith was penetrated with a foreign object. Tom Westcott wrote the book Ripper Confidential, and he also has a book out called The Bank Holiday Murders. And this looks at the theory that, okay, maybe it's not a pure hoax, but what if Jack the Ripper was a member of one of those London street gangs and he participated in the murders and the attacks and they escalated? First, maybe
By
the attack
himself,
on Emily
yeah.
Horsnell,
Yeah.
then he attacks Annie Millwood and she survives. He attacks another woman named Dana Wilson and she survives, and then goes on to commit the murder of Martha Tabram. Now the Ripper has escalated his physical violence. That's Ripper Confidential by Tom Westcott.
But
And
I don't see the money as a prime objective from the killer because this woman was really poor. So, but I, I think the on what they were wearing, the some stuff was cut on what the woman was wearing. The oh, I don't remember the word.
are you talking
Uh,
about like the story of Polly Nichols and how she goes out? She says, "I've got a new bonnet on," like she has like a new hat that's making her look very attractive, so she can like attract men to her.
oh yeah. Also the story, but I've read or listened that the Reaper just not uh, mutilated his victim, but also cut part of what they were wearing.
Well, that could be one thing, but with the murders of Emily Horsnell and Emma Smith, there could also be something where they don't have the money now. And
No,
they're trying to say, you have to give us, this amount of money every week. You're paying us for protection, whether you like it or not. And if they refused, then they were murdered. So, yes, they would have been very poor, but it's like a blackmail operation that was done. And that's the way that it was presented to me, or at the very least, the way that I understood it.
but I don't see that as a motive. But yeah, it's a possibility. But in the same time, if you kill this woman, you will not have money anymore. So
Absolutely
and
not.
no, that it's really strange. And I I assume that the press at the time was doing a lot of money printing this story.
Oh, you mean like overinflating the currency? Printing too much
Yeah,
money? Well,
I'm talking about the press. I'm talking about the press,
like the newspapers?
the newspaper. Yeah, I assume they was making a lot of money talking about this crime.
Well, definitely about Jack the Ripper, and they would be those crimes would definitely be more widely reported than the previous ones that I mentioned, 1887,
Yeah,
and even the murder of Emma Smith. But they definitely did keep records of this. That's why we have the illustrations of Emma Smith, the Osborne Street murder,
yeah,
and even a very good illustration of the guest house where Emily Horsnell was staying. And this is one of the reasons why Tom Westcott explores this, because he points out that many of the female victims stayed in the 18 George Street guest house and the 19 George Street guest house. And, a lot of this stuff has been reported on. So
yeah.
I do agree with that.
Do we have see something in the chat?
Sure, we have one from Colin here that says the royal family has been heavily associated with the Whitechapel murders. Oh, absolutely. Because I only cracked the surface with Stephen Knight's The Final Solution. Because, firstly, the theory is that either Mary Kelly or somebody else was having an affair with the Prince of England. In one version of the story that you're going to read online, it said Mary Kelly herself was the one who was having the affair. In the other version, it's just that she knew who was having the affair, and all the people who knew about this were murdered, like Polly Nichols,
Murder
Annie
to
Chapman, Liz Fry, Catherine
to
Eddowes, and Mary
silence
Kelly.
them. Yeah,
They had the secret knowledge. They knew the
yeah,
secret, so that's why they were killed. And in Stephen Knight's theory, there are three participants: William Gold, the royal surgeon, his carriage driver, and Walter Sickert, a painter, who also would go on to leave. He would go on to make multiple paintings of Jack the Ripper. And Patricia Cornwell took a lot of her theory about Walter Sickert from
yeah.
these previously established observations. She even said that in her book Portrait of a Killer, although she didn't give a lot of citations. But yes, though Prince Eddie, the Prince of England at the time, even goes on to become a suspect himself. Although because he was a member of the royal family, as I understand, his movements throughout the entirety of 1888 are all documented. The historians can tell you, oh, he was having lunch with this person on this day, and it doesn't. They claim it doesn't match up with the Whitechapel murders, so he wasn't the killer himself, but he is an alternative suspect. Yeah, but Colin, very good comment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh yes, the Yorkshire Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe, back in the 1980s. This is another big case of where somebody was writing letters taking credit for murders that he didn't commit, and there was even
Ah,
another letter hoaxer in that one.
I didn't know that. Really, it's the first time I heard about this case in the Yorkshire.
Yes, the Yorkshire Ripper, but he was captured. His name was Peter Sutcliffe.
Ah,
Well, he was like the oldest of six children, I think, and he was somebody who dealt with some very odd relationships with his parents. But he most likely, I mean, my unprofessional opinion, think that he had some type of neurotransmitter issues, if you will.
and his crime was let's say a copycat of the original Jack the Ripper, or it was different crime because
Well, I definitely think the letters were copycats of the
yeah,
1888 crimes, but as I said, they've tracked those back to somebody else. With and I'm not an expert on the Yorkshire
no,
Ripper. I've only done one episode about him, but with that one, he's doing similar things to the women, like he's mutilating their bodies, stabbing them multiple
I
times with screwdrivers and such disgusting things. But I think the Ripper of the 1880s was way more vicious than Peter Sutcliffe.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And we have one comment here from Vincent McConnell who says he thinks every single thing is fake. He must be referring to Thomas Henry Horn. Well, the Ripper hoax theory is quite similar to the Zodiac hoax theory, except, Vincent, with the Ripper hoax theory, there is a lot more of a connection to the newspapers and the idea that the newspapers and the news agency was actually fabricating this, and they were the ones who created this type of myth for the reasons that I've laid out. With the Zodiac hoax theory, here's a challenge. And Vincent and everybody in the chat, maybe you'll agree. There are so many communications from the Zodiac killer that are given strong consideration, dozens of them. And with the Zodiac, we also have the ciphers. And all of these things contain esoteric symbols and very similar types of handwriting that span on from 1969 to 1971, pause, 1974, restart. Jack the Ripper? I don't think so.
no, I,
What I'm trying to say is I think the Ripper hoax theory is more defendable, but okay, you guys in the comments section brought this to my attention because I was talking a lot about the Ripper hoax theory, and they're like, wait a second, Ned, you misunderstand it. With the Ripper hoax theory, there could have still been a serial killer. There still could have been a Ripper, and it's
oh yeah,
just
yeah,
that the
absolutely, yeah,
newspaper guys thought of this plan to write the letters. They were following the story, and as Jerome just said, Polly Nichols and N.A. Chapman's crimes were heavily reported on by the press.
yeah,
So somebody wrote letters taking credit for it, and then it kept going.
yeah. So we are going to talk about the fifth victims who
Gladly, yes. The fifth
yeah,
victim was Mary Kelly, who was
Mary
murdered
Kelly,
on November 9th of 1888 in the early AM hours. She was murdered indoors, very heavily mutilated and eviscerated. Prior to her murder, she was reported to have been seen walking with a man who was very well dressed, almost a high end man. But and the name of the witness who saw her was George Hutchinson, and he
yeah,
knew Mary Kelly personally, so he decided to keep an eye on the situation. And he claims that he waited for about 45 minutes outside of her building, and that he got a very good look at the person, was able to recall an enormous amount of details. He's has a gold watch and a horseshoe pin, and these are the type of cuffs he has on his shirt, and all types of things like that. So Mary Kelly was mutilated almost beyond recognition,
yeah,
and she was identified by her ex-boyfriend Joseph Barnett, who is sometimes only referred to as a friend. There's a very popular illustration of him where he's referred to as simply a friend of the deceased, but it appears that there was a romantic relationship between Joseph Barnett and Mary Kelly, and they had split up on October 30th of 1888, and Joseph Barnett goes on to become a Jack Ripper suspect himself. Although, based on how extensively Mary Kelly was murdered and mutilated, and as Vincent says, it was absolutely brutal, if
yeah,
Joseph Barnett were the murderer, he would have had to put on one hell of an acting job to the authorities because he's the person who identifies her body. I know psychopaths and sociopaths can do that, but I don't know if that could happen. And we have one here from Cullen. I think the English government put the Ripper case to bed many years ago because of whom it might concern. They just boxed it. Colin, do you think that's because it deals with the issues with the Masons, the royal family? And like I said, at first I didn't think the Masonic connection had any merit at all. Then, as I began to look at all these details, I was like, okay, maybe there actually is some credibility to this. Or if I'm not endorsing it, I can say it's a defendable theory. The royal conspiracy, I have a few more reservations about, but I've definitely looked into the Masonic angle in the past.
Yeah, yeah.
And
There is a lot of different theory, and I have just before the show, I was watching a map of Whitechapel, and I was stunning how there were a lot of little, really tiny alleyway everywhere, and it was like a maze. Uh, so I'm wonder if the Reaper dressing was well dressed, was well dressed, or because it's it was a place who was really poor. People was really poor, and so if the guy is well dressed and coming from somewhere else, he will be immediately recognized by not recognize his faces, but recognized by his type of dress. So I wonder if it's somebody who was living in Whitechapel or around Whitechapel, of it if it was somebody who were living completely somewhere else.
all I can say about that is sometimes people will present this theory that the Ripper had to have been a resident of Whitechapel. And you guys can kind of tell that I'm leaning that way, but I just don't accept it when they say he had to have been a resident of Whitechapel. I guess
No,
I always have a little bit of natural skepticism about that when they just say, no, this has to be the way that the crime was committed. Well,
no,
what do you mean it has to?
no. I agree. Doesn't mean anything. No,
So, like, as far as, about being an upper class person, that would stand out. That would make you stand out. I think it could be a little bit possible and somewhat feasible. And you're going to be dealing with the cold by November of 1888. You're going to be wearing overcoats and such, and you're going to be hiding some of your appearance. But even if the person is not a resident of Whitechapel, that doesn't mean that they were upper class. You could have a poor person from a different part of England coming on in. And I even defended Robert Graysmith when he was talking about a suspect named John
yeah,
Gibson, who was a pastor from Scotland. I was like, all right, well, it's physically possible to go from Scotland to England, even if he didn't live in England at the time.
yeah,
Paul Graysmith claims that he does. That's the subject of the book The Bell Tower by Robert Graysmith.
yeah. And so after his fifth fifth victim, he stopped to kill.
Well, we don't necessarily know that. I would believe that, and I would lean toward that myself, but the Whitechapel murders will go all the way to 1891. Firstly, after the murder of Mary Kelly, we have the murder of Rose Milett on December 20th of 1888. And there are a couple variants of the story. One is just that she was strangled with a piece of twine. And then another variant is that she's actually gets something stuck around her neck and she goes into a seizure, and that it's purely an accident and that she
Yeah,
wasn't even murdered. But I tend to think that she was murdered. It's just that she was strangled. And the murder of Rose Milett occurred on December 20th of 1888. Let's see, what's that? 80 years before the Zodiac Killer began
yeah,
operating on December 20th of 1968. So this launched a giant Zodiac Ripper connection thing for me, and I was just such a big believer in that for the longest time. And I kind of came down from my cloud about how, all right, maybe I've just misjudged this all. And one of the reasons why was because I read Pat Brown's book, Killing for Sport, and she talks about how serial killers can function by number one, they commit a crime that's unplanned. Number two, they recreate the first crime with their second crime. Like the second crime is an attempt to do something. Okay, I got away with murder. Can I do it again? And by the third crime, they alter their method a little bit. And they're almost developing a signature and a way to operate. And then by the fourth crime, they're going to do something like that more in a more grounded and controlled way. And I think the Zodiac Killer is an absolute excellent example of that. She could be wrong, I could be wrong, but that means you don't need any type of real Ripper connection if you're just going to explore the stories from that way. With Jack the Ripper, we don't know 100%. If the murder of Martha Tabram actually was the Ripper, that throws that equation off a little bit. But let's look at what she said. The first crime is unplanned, impulsive, he snaps, he loses control. The second crime is to recreate it, and the third crime creates an identity. Polly Nichols is murdered. Annie Chapman is murdered and mutilated more severely. On the third night, a message is left behind on a wall. All of that works out.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, it's really strange. This, I mean, strange. No, but uh, he start really, let's say, killing this girl, like, I don't want to say normally because you don't kill anyone, and his behavior grows up, and he finished by Mary Kelly, who is completely unrecognizable. And after that, we don't know if continue or stop to kill, but we can see an evolution in his behavior. So, do you think it was somebody who act with impulse, with his impulsive reaction, or it was premeditated?
The first crime could have been impulsive, but after that, I think they were definitely premeditated. What I don't think they were is some bizarre calculated plan. Now, they could have been. I mean, Colin has some good things here about the Freemasons. We can talk about that in a second, but maybe not so calculated where he's just thinking, all right, I'm going to, put on this elaborate ruse to try and lure her here. He's just kind of roaming about looking for a victim, sneaking around the alleys looking for a woman to murder. I think almost certainly the murder of Mary Kelly was a very calculated plan because that took place indoors in her home and the Ripper was uninterrupted. And I actually believe that the Ripper was high on cocaine when he did that because he was with her for about 2 hours and just the ferocity was unleashed, suggested he might
Yeah,
have had some type of stimulant. It could have been another drug. Now, you're talking about what evidence would there be that the final crime was the murder of Mary Kelly? Well, I forget where I was reading this. It might have been John J. Edelston's Jack the Ripper and Encyclopedia, where he says that the Ripper committed the murder of Mary Kelly that was so brutal that he didn't need to kill again. Nothing would top that. It's almost as if he's pushing killing to the extreme.
yeah.
And he's just kind of over and done with it. And somebody
And
that
do
would
you
agree
think,
with that. Go
yeah,
ahead.
do you think it's possible that a criminal like this arrive to a state where he don't kill anymore because he had this goal?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily call that a goal. It's almost as if at a certain point he's doing it because of rage and because of a thrill. And then at that point, it's no longer going to be exciting for him. And one person who might agree with that is the profiler, Richard Walter. When you look at his observations about the Zodiac, he's kind of saying the similar things that he's proven that he can commit the crimes and he's proven that he can get away with it.
Yep.
There's no more thrill in it for him. And that type of thinking that I is something that I can digest and I can examine. But I want to come back to this Freemason stuff because
Yeah.
Colin has put this in the chat. I told you that there are these three ruffians that have murdered the architect of King Solomon's temple, Hiram Abif. And what they actually do is they take the body outside of the town where he was murdered and they mark the grave with a sprig of acacia. And because they left a mark behind, they could easily track down the footsteps of the three ruffians. And when I said that they are murdered, they are mutilated, but one of them is also disemboweled, and that's Jubilo, I believe, just going off of memory. Jubilo, and Jubilum are the names of the ruffians. He's disemboweled, and the intestines are taken out and thrown over the shoulder. And with two of Jack the Ripper's victims, Annie Chapman and Catherine Eddowes, the intestines were pulled out and thrown over the shoulder. Oh, Jerome, when you look at those illustrations of the Ripper on Google Images and you can see him pulling out the intestines of the victims, I thought that was done for dramatic effect. No, it actually appears that happened, that the intestines were pulled out and
Yeah,
thrown
it was
over the
accurate.
shoulder of two
Yeah,
of the victims.
yeah. It,
Okay, Colin does have one here when he says they say the Ripper was a physician or a surgeon. Now, the alternatives to this could be something that I would even cite Patricia Cornwell for, when she said that the way that the Ripper was operating isn't necessarily surgical. He's just stabbing the women downward. He's just putting his hand in their body and grabbing and pulling, and he's just doing this thing in a maniacal way. Whereas a surgeon would be doing this in a very calculated way. I'm very 50-50 on this doctor thing, as you see. I mean, it provides an explanation as to how and why he could cut out the uterus and the heart and the kidney and the intestines. But also,
yeah,
I mean, butchers, and I brought up the fishmonger. The reason why I keep saying that is Jacob Levy, a Jack the Ripper suspect, was a butcher, and Joseph Barnett, the boyfriend of Mary Kelly, was a fishmonger. Hyam Hyams was the cigar maker, who's the subject of the book One Arm Jack by Sarah Bax Horton. So there are just some alternatives to that.
yeah, yeah. And at the time, how many suspects there were in this case?
How many suspects?
Yeah, at the
Too
time.
many to count. Well, in 1894, the inspector Melville McNaughton revealed three suspects,
Yeah,
and their names were Montague John Druitt, Kosminski, and Michael Ostrog. Now, there's some debate about who is he talking about when he refers to this Kosminski. Most people believe that it's someone named Aaron Kosminski, although Martin Fido, the ripperologist, believed that it was not, and he's actually talking about somebody named Nathan Kaminsky, who was referred to by the alias David Cohen. And David Cohen was not his legal name. That was just something generic written down, like John Doe, something that was just a pseudonym that was given to him. So with um with Kosminski, he's definitely looked at by the police. Michael Ostrog is a ridiculous Jack the Ripper suspect because he was most likely incarcerated in France at the time, and Montague John Druitt is somebody who was in England. He was a barrister and school teacher who committed suicide in December of 1888. We don't know the exact date, but that means that he would have just been committing the murder of Mary Kelly and just kind of coming back to his senses and then really reawakening the distress. And, I don't know about that. He's almost referred to as a fall guy, but that's referred to in the McNaughton Memorandum of 1894. So another suspect that was named by the Sun in 1894, the Sun was a newspaper, and they said that Jack the Ripper had been identified and his name was Thomas Cutbush. And Inspector Melville McNaughton decided to write the memo as a response to the article from the Sun saying, Thomas Cutbush is a mentally deranged man who tried to stab two women in the buttocks. He wasn't Jack the Ripper. But even if we go back earlier than 1894 to 1891, we have the final Whitechapel murder, and that is the murder of Frances Coles, who was murdered late at night, and she's seen walking with a man named James Thomas Sadler. And he goes on to become the prime suspect in her murder, although allegedly he's the last person to have seen her alive, and maybe somebody saw a man that matched his description with Frances Coles, but she is murdered. And James Thomas Sadler has a alibi for this. And I'm going into a very odd place. I would even cite the true crime YouTuber John Lorden when he once said, I know there's evidence to the contrary, but I still think that he did it. And I've often wondered about James Thomas Sadler and his alibi, because I think it's just that some people are vouching for his whereabouts at the time. I don't know how solid that is. And like even has blood on his clothes after the murder of Frances Coles. However, they also reported that the Ripper case had been solved in 1891. They've got the guy. It's James Thomas Sadler. I have a standalone episode about him on Black Box Online Radio, as well as one on the murder of Francis Coles if people want to hear more. But James Thomas Sadler almost certainly could not have been Jack the Ripper because he was a sailor and he had logbooks and he was able to show not just hearsay and
No, no, no.
testimony. He had the logbooks to show that he was not in England at the time of some of the murders. So I don't think he was Jack the Ripper at all. Almost certainly
No.
not. Now, that's just a handful of suspects. As far as Kosminski goes, most people accept that the Melville McNaughton Memorandum is referring to Aaron Kosminski. And, oh, that distinctive fact documentary that you sent me, though, really showed that there were numerous people with the name Kosminski
Yeah.
in Whitechapel, and that was very surprising. And I just mentioned Hyam Hyams, the suspect of Sarah Bax Horton. She had to go through the records, and she found 4 people in England at the time named Hyam Hyams, and she had to make sure that she's looking at the right one, because
Yeah.
there's 4 people that had the exact same name. Yeah, so just really can't put a number on the number of suspects, like the Zodiac case. I mean, thousands, but
Yeah,
in
yeah.
terms of
And
considered ones, I'd say that there are about maybe 150, 200 Jack the Ripper suspects that are strongly considered.
it's a
But
lot.
the interesting thing is, Jerome, with the Zodiac case, we have 2,500 suspects. We might not have the killer. With
No.
Jack the Ripper, we might very well have the killer involved there.
Yeah, that's highly possible. Yeah, yeah. And it's still an open oh, it's still an open case.
More or less, yes. It's never
Yeah,
been solved.
yeah,
But we have a comment here from Jody Yount, who says Aaron Kosminski. Aaron Kosminski could have been Jack the Ripper. And one thing that I don't particularly like about the challenges to him as being the Ripper is he was reported to have had a phobia of bathing and he ate food out of the gutter. And that it was just a strike against him as a suspect. But firstly, his phobia of bathing and eating food out of the gutter wasn't reported until 1891, 3 years after the murders took place. And, I don't necessarily know if he behaved like that in 1888. And also, somebody brought this up in the comment section on Black Box Online Radio. Even if he didn't bathe regularly in 1888, the women most likely didn't either because of all these conditions of poverty that we're talking about. And, even a profiler like Pat Brown talks about how she doesn't believe the Ripper would even walk up and talk to the women. Hey, come here for a second. I want to ask you something. She thinks the Ripper just blindsided them and stabbed them. Maybe not Liz Stride, but the other victims. And so that's something else to consider. Oh, by the way, Quentin Broom is in the chat, and he says Jerome
yeah.
looks a bit like Simon Cowell. Really? I don't know, Jerome. What do you think about that?
I don't know.
I never thought you looked like Simon Cowell. But
No, I never thought about that, so I don't know. And
yes, American Idol, America's Got Talent. Jerome's got talent.
but thank you.
Of course.
Yeah, it's really pure evil when you think about all this crime, and you talk a lot on BBOR about psychology,
Yes.
right? And what's are your thoughts or your thoughts about this kind of killer?
You mentioned John Douglas at the beginning
Yeah,
of this, kind of the middle of this discussion. And I said maybe I didn't agree with that one statement from John Douglas, but he created a psychological profile of Jack the Ripper that I didn't think was too bad. He's estimating that the killer is late 20s, early 30s, working a menial job, maybe somebody who is dealing with some type of mental illness, even though it's probably not completely debilitating psychosis, like someone who's a clinical schizophrenic. Although one explanation could be that the Ripper was experiencing episodes of psychosis. I mentioned the suspect Hyam Hyams, and the explanation that has been put forward is that he had epilepsy, and he would experience these epileptic seizures that would affect his personality. And that's not pure speculation, because in reports from his wife, he would get violent after these epileptic seizures, partnered with the fact that he was an alcoholic and like a bunch of other mental health issues. Chaim Hyams also goes into the asylum for the rest of his life after the murders take place. Aaron Kosminski also went into the asylum. Now, 28 to 33 years old, I think that's completely reasonable for being Jack the Ripper. Aaron Kosminski, mind you, was only 23 at the time. So he's
Really young.
considerably
Yeah.
younger, but it's not abnormal for 23-year-olds to go on to become serial killers.
No,
So,
sure,
in terms of
sure.
psychology, I think the Ripper was deranged, but I do think he was aware of what he was doing. That's how he could navigate the alleyways of Whitechapel.
Yeah.
I also think that the Ripper had, again, to answer Vincent's question, I don't think he was completely stupid. I don't think he was an imbecile. Maybe average intelligence, very lucky. And also, he kind of would scout out the areas a little bit, what I call heightened predatory instincts. He's making sure the coast is clear for a little bit before he can sneak around. For the longest time, I would have said that I didn't think the Ripper wrote the Goulston Street Graffito until I watched the Distinctive Fact documentary. I'm like, all right, that's a convincing case. He probably did. Now, as far as writing the letters, I still stand by that. I don't think the killer wrote any of the letters, and John Douglas wrote that in his psychological profile as well. I just think that there are much easier explanations that have been put forward about how they were hoaxes created by the newspaper business.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm more in this. I I can believe that the hoax uh, letter was really hoax in this case more than in the killer case because
Well, Jerome, can I turn around and ask you, if someone were to tell you that the Zodiac letters were fabricated by one of the newspapers, say the San Francisco Chronicle, what would you say to that?
that's possible. Yeah,
Oh,
because
you think all the letters are hoaxes in the Zodiac case?
no, 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 no,
Yeah,
not
that's
at
what I'm
all.
asking you. You think all, if someone told you that all of the letters were hoaxes, you think that's possible?
Oh no, 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 not all
Not in
the
the
no,
Zodiac case, right?
no, no, no.
Because in the Zodiac case, we have so much more evidence. We have Paul Stein's bloody shirt. We don't only
Yeah,
have letters. We have the car door at Lake Berryessa with dates of Zodiac activity. I mean, there's evidence that shows that the killer actually wrote the letters
no.
and
I think that
communicated.
his last communication was the citizen letter. I, in my opinion.
It's a really good one, Jerome, actually, because I was talking a lot about how I've re-explored the possibility of the 1974 letters being authentic. But when you say the citizen letter, do you mean the Badlands card that's signed
Yeah,
a citizen? Yeah, yeah, right. Because you have the Exorcist letter,
yeah,
and then you have the SLA letter and the Count Marco letter and the Badlands card, and all of those are not using the Zodiac name. They're
no,
talking about pieces of media, specifically the Exorcist and the Badlands card. Both mention movies, and it's almost just like someone is saying, "Yeah, sorry for being a killer."
yeah, most likely,
No,
yeah,
well, he is right. Like, you should never glorify violence. The glorification of violence is never justifiable. That's what it says in the Badlands card, right?
yeah. And
But we have a
con
question here from Jody Yount, who says, I believe they say his DNA was linked to the fourth victim, Catherine Eddowes. What's your opinion? Do you think that's credible? No, I was talking about that a little earlier in the live stream, Jody, and
no,
that's the theory of Russell Edwards in his book, Naming Jack the Ripper, Naming the Ripper. And it's quite possible that DNA came from somebody else. Secondarily, I believe it's only a mitochondrial form of DNA, and that will not be used. That can be used to eliminate suspects, but not confirm suspects. Okay, Jody, I did a short episode about this once, and on Black Box Online Radio, I put shorts out Monday through Friday. And in my short episode, I was like, if we truly had the Ripper's DNA, then I think a lot of people would believe Russell Edwards way more than they do. Because, as Jerome can tell you with the Zodiac case, when one person writes a book and they say, I understand the secret evidence, and other people don't, usually it's their theory, it's what they believe to be true, but there's a reason why more people aren't accepting it, and that is because it hasn't been verified. And I know you might be thinking, well, I mean, maybe they are telling truth. Yeah, but it's an unverified claim and it's not universally accepted. I wish we did have the Ripper's DNA. That'd make things a lot easier. You could track down the descendants of Aaron Kosminski and Chaim Hyams and all those
Yeah,
people that I've been talking about. Just do some like DNA test, but I don't think so.
no. And we have here Colin who say the zodiac, yeah, possessed by a demon. I don't think, I don't believe in demons or angels. I think people could be really horrible. They, they don't need to be possessed by a demon. They could be really, really horrible and staying a human. But for sure, when you see this kind of act, you don't want to mention them as a human because you are a human. So you don't want to be in the same level that that, that this guy. So I can understand that, but I don't think a demon has possessed anyone anytime for a crime. But it's a belief. I don't challenge anyone about that. Everybody is free to believe what he wants. But in my opinion, people are can can do the worst, and there is no demon uh, in that. Uh, but it's devil, yeah, yeah. It's evil. But I don't know, Ned. What do you think about that?
I think there's some metaphorical value to that because you remember from the Melvin Belli letter, Jerome, the Zodiac
Yeah,
saying, "There's this thing inside of me that won't let me from stop killing." Now, I think the Zodiac wanted that to be very clear that that's like him. That's what you were saying, Jerome, right? That's just him doing bad things. But on the TV show Dexter, as well as the books by Jeff Lindsay, there's a fictional serial killer who calls that his dark passenger, where they're like, it's almost as if there's this darker persona that's within him that can take control, or at the very least, that can guide him to commit the murders, the dark passenger. There's another serial killer that said something almost identical to that. I forget who it was. Do you recall off the top of your head? The serial killer just said like there's this dark persona within him that's driving him to kill. Oh, um, anyway, I
no.
mean,
Anyway,
it's definitely talked about on the show Dexter. But Jody says, sorry I caught this late. I watched your episodes on BBO War and seen the episodes. Been a while though, huge fan. Well, Jody, every Wednesday I still do a segment about Jack the Ripper, Ripper Wednesday. You can always tune in, and I'm going to be just going stronger and stronger with that because, as I was telling Jerome, there are so many resources out there about Jack the Ripper, and not just the books. There are also stories and poetry, even. And I haven't even done all the suspects yet on Ripper Wednesday. So that segment is not slowing down based on the amount of information, and I'm fully aware. The segments that I've done on Black Box Online Radio are sometimes more popular in the Zodiac field and DB Cooper's field. Then the Ripper is down at the bottom because I'm not famous. And I also don't claim to be a Ripperologist. And I'm not even trying to act like I'm an expert on Jack the Ripper. I'm just somebody that sorts through the material like anybody else. But yeah,
yeah.
Ripper Wednesday is going strong, and I invite you to come back, Jody.
Oh yeah, yeah. Go ahead and go on Black Box Online Radio. It's an excellent channel, and I don't say that because Ned is here. I always said that BBOR was my favorite uh, show, podcast, YouTube channel, as you
Jerome,
want.
you got a cheers from the Fox for that.
Oh, thank you. Cheers, my friend. But it's true, you do a really excellent job for everything you do. When you
I don't
talk
think
about the zodiac, you are really accurate about what you say. When you talk about Jack the Ripper, it's the same. When you talk about any subject you are talking about, you are really good, and it's really pleasant to hear you. And even my woman who don't really speak English, she speak English, but she had some difficulty. She was telling me that it was really nice to hear your voice, and it was really just really for somebody who don't speak English and who don't really understand everything. You do really a great job because You explain really very well everything, and your language is really perfect.
Thank the West Virginia public school system. Always coming to you from West Virginia at heart. Um, yes, but by the way, we have a comment that's here from Quentin who says the Ripper sent a body part, correct? But I guess that was fake and not verifiable. Well, Quentin, yes, the Ripper did mail in half of a kidney to George Lusk, the chairman of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, and the kidney was placed into a box that was mailed with the From Hell letter. And he also claimed in the From Hell letter that he cooked and fried the other piece and ate it. But, I guess, is it fake and not verifiable? I lean toward it being fake. The explanation that has been provided is that it was a prank created by a medical student who would have had the kidneys available for dissection, or that a medical student could have stolen one from a laboratory, and it would not have been impossible. And there are even some reports out there that the kidneys of pigs were almost identical to the kidneys of humans. And I would really hope that medical doctors, even in 1888, could recognize that that was a pig's kidney and not a human. But even if it's a human kidney, it could have been one from, you know, uh, um, a cadaver in one of the laboratories. But was that
That's true.
proven? I don't think so. I don't think the kidney was ever determined to have an origin because some people insist that it came from Catherine Eddowes, and other people insist that it did not. It's just uncertain. And the real kidney no longer exists, so it can't be examined.
Yeah, yeah. And did we have the uh, autopsy report of each victim?
If I've been through it like step by step, mostly just through commentaries, as opposed to going through everything, and that'll have to be something I'm going to do more in the future, going through the autopsy reports of the victims, and some of them have actually been assembled into books, like with the one from Mary Kelly. There are things from that in the Inquest of Mary Kelly, and I believe that book is available online. And we have a question though here from Quentin who says, "Was the DNA on the scarf legit?" Like I think it's questionable as well, highly questionable. I'm also really wondering about the origin of it because, again, Russell Edwards is saying that there is semen DNA on the scarf or the shawl of Catherine Eddowes, whatever it was. And I just would wonder why there wouldn't be semen at more crime scenes.
And when the DNA was tested?
2000, in the 2000s, the book came out in 2014, is what I was about
Yeah,
to say.
it confirms 100 years later, so it's late. But
Jerome, you got to take that one. I'm going to give that one to Jerome.
speaking of Zodiac thought, I think Hatfield Allen was too dumb to be Zodiac if he had his complex mathematical reasoning and structure like Garrett Penn says. Then who are the top suspects? Aline Cheney. Yeah, uh, I don't know if Allen was dumb or not. I have nothing. I have nothing to say that it was dumb or not. I cannot prove anything. And about Garrett Penn, I spent time to try to find his book, Time 17. I never had the chance to read it, so I don't know about his reasoning in and his structure about that. And for me, the top suspect, but it's just my opinion. There is no real hard fact. For me, my top suspect are Cheney and Panzarella. In for Cheney, the killer, Panzarella, the lawyer, Ron Allen giving information about Lee to Don or Sandy. It depends, but he didn't know that his friend was killer. So I don't place him in in the let's say the conspirator. No, no, no. I think he didn't know anything about that. But yeah, that's my theory. But it's only my theory. There is a lot of theory who are r- much better than mine, and but I don't believe in the hoax theory. If you want my take on that, and Richard Gaikowski, I don't think it. No, I have nothing on him.
Okay, then I guess I'll have to take a stab at these questions here. Firstly, I guess Andrews is on the screen, and then I can respond to Jody's. Andrews says Richard Gaikowski was very skilled with computers and worked a college IT job later in his life, and he could have created the ciphers without much difficulty. Well, that is something that Tom Boyd wants to reinforce about Gaikowski, that he was self educated in computers and he would have had the brain for learning mathematical stuff and things about radians, partnered with the fact that he was just like a naturally curious and inquisitive guy. But I wanted to respond to Jody's question
Yeah,
about, do you think Arthur Lee Allen was too dumb to be the Zodiac? One person who disagreed with that was Robert Graysmith. And even though I criticize Graysmith till the cows come home, I would just point out some things that he shared in his Zodiac books that didn't seem completely far out. And that is that, number one, he tries to say Arthur Lee Allen might have been just slightly above average in intelligence. You know, like we're talking about average, maybe a little bit above. And he also had a very high understanding of chemistry, even to the point where Arthur Lee Allen could have been a teacher of chemistry
yeah, that's
and
true.
partnered with his experience in the Navy. You know, he could have learned all about things like radians and math. And, you know, he was not I don't think that he was purely dumb or anything, or just an imbecile the way that some people try to make him out to be. Instead, I think that he was a troubled person. He had probably some very bad experiences in his life, and that
Yeah,
maybe led him to go on to commit very heinous acts himself. And you know, we've been talking about Jack the Ripper, horrible things done by Jack the Ripper, but Arthur Lee Allen was still a bad person in different ways, and he was more or less a mentally deranged individual who didn't control himself. Now, as far as Gareth Penn's observations about the mathematical signatures, radians, sure, I'll listen to that all day long. The Zodiac talked about radians, but every single thing in the Zodiac mystery, according to Gareth Penn, is a secret message containing Morse code and binary and, you know, hidden mathematical clues. You can rearrange the letters of certain words to get a zip code in Massachusetts. Area code for a phone, excuse me. I don't believe that all of those things are accurate.
no, and for me, I think that you cannot really know if somebody is intelligent or dumb if you don't know him personally. And I never and neither had met Arthur Allen when he was alive, so it's difficult to say that like this. We never met him,
Well,
so
Jerome, what would you say about some of the suspects, though, like Michael O'Hare, you know, PhD in architecture, Ted Kaczynski was a mathematician? What would you say
yeah.
about them? Like, would you say that you could assess their intelligence?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Kaczynski was highly intelligent. I think more than the Zodiac. Yeah,
Right, right. Like, I mean, I know what you're trying to say. With some guy like Arthur Lee Allen, who never really showed off intelligence in his working life, whether, you know, like he's going to be working as a custodian, maybe he's a teacher for a little while, and he was going to like work in a store and such. He had lots of trouble. Do you mean with somebody
yeah.
like Allen, he didn't get the opportunity to show his intelligence? But I mean, I would say that, you know, Ted Kaczynski, PhD in mathematics, Michael O'Hare's lecturer in public policy, I think they're intelligent.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think so. Yeah, but in the same times, I never met them, so I don't know.
True.
Maybe
Well, Kaczynski definitely would have had problems with social skills if, like, he wouldn't have
yeah.
been smart in that regard. It's like social intelligence, if we're going to go on what the stories that have been shared in the biographies about him are true.
Did you see another comment?
Oh yeah, there are quite a few actually from Colin and Quinton,
Yeah.
and even one more from Andrew. I'll let you choose one, Jerome.
Oh, uh,
The Zodiac killer was engulfed in porn.
what's the evidence to claim that? I
Now,
don't-
if the Zodiac is engulfed in porn, why isn't he committing more sexual crimes? I mean, even the Lake Berryessa stabbing is
yeah, he have the time to do what he want to do to Cecilia if he wants. So
I'm not really seeing the evidence of that he's doing anything that was inspired by pornographic. Now, somebody like Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker,
yeah,
perhaps,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
the
For
Zodiac,
no,
but the
yeah,
Zodiac
for
is even talking about this in his letter, saying that on the cipher, saying that to kill is the most thrilling experience. It's even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. Well, he's not really saying anything about porn. He's saying that killing is better than sex. So I don't know if that really shows he was inspired by porn at all. If anything, he's saying he prefers killing over sex. That's just my take on the subject.
yeah. I did agree with you, Ned.
The Berryessa sketch does resemble Gaikowski, according to a guy who sometimes posts in the comments section on Ned's channel. Andrew, is that commenter named Joel Mahan? Just curious. And yes, the Berryessa sketch does resemble Gaikowski to a certain extent. And if you were to take the glasses off of Gaikowski, I don't think he would resemble the Presidio sketch that much. The Lake
No,
Berryessa sketch has the more rectangular face, and Gaikowski, of course, had his famous big brown hair and so on.
yeah,
Sure,
and the sketch
Berryessa sketch resembles
was
that more,
more
but
a round face.
yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, we got loads of them, Drone. I'm thinking the Zodiac was a genius. I don't feel that ALA could have pulled off this level of sophistication. Well, Jody, one person who would agree with you is Drew Beeson, who talks
Yeah,
very clearly about how he thinks that Don Chaney was more intelligent than Allen, and he kind of set this all up and used everybody as a bunch of dupes. Maybe Jerome's in a similar boat.
I agree. I completely agree. I think Cheney was more intelligent than Alan. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Which
But
is that's
I
what
don't.
Drew has talked about a lot, and I know you're on a similar path with him and you have their theory, but he's just said this so many times that he thinks that Don Chaney was way smarter than he let on. And if Allen's here, then Chaney's up here. And when Chaney tells these wild stories, he knows that he's lying, but he knows that
Yeah,
people will go along with it because he had a very high IQ and he knew how to deceive people.
yeah, yeah. He was playing dumb. He was playing the idiot. But
But Allen couldn't pull off the sophistication of the Zodiac. Jody, I've never liked Arthur Lee Allen as a suspect.
no, me
I
neither.
mean, part of it is because number one, I thought he didn't match any of the physical descriptions really. I thought he was too big, and he definitely didn't have the face shapes out of anybody, even the Lake Berryessa voyeur, partner with the fact that he could have been balding, and you have to make the assumption that he was wearing a wig. Then you hear this stuff about him being a child molester, sex offender, and the fact that he wouldn't be committing crimes like that, wouldn't be committing murders like that on his age appropriate victims. Hmm. Like I think all of those are strikes against Arthur Lee Allen.
Yep,
And
yep.
Vincent will have to come back on your New Cokes 2024 because he will dispute all of that with me. Bring it on. But I think he may have left the chat.
Yeah, yeah. It's not a problem, Vince. You are welcome when you want on the chat. Talk about
Oh, yeah,
everything you
yeah.
want. And yeah, about the similarities between the Zodiac attack and the Reaper attack, what do we have? Fifth, five victims uh, in a short period of time. Uh, After, go ahead because you know more than I. So
5 victims, a very short reign of terror or period of activity for operating. And even with the murder of Sherry Jo Bates that happens before the Zodiac crimes, we have a stabbing crime also before Jack the Ripper, the murder of Martha Tabram, which, it's debated to this day. Well, maybe this killer committed 6 crimes. Also, letters have been attributed to both of these killers who have short periods of activity or reigns of terror. And the letters contain bizarre misspellings that some people think are what? Intentional. Other people think they're unintentional, and the letter writers could not spell. And we have confirmed communications and unconfirmed communications. And even though I told you guys I'm not the biggest believer of this anymore, it's that the The murder of Rose Milet takes place on December 20th of 1888. The murders of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen by the Zodiac occurred on December 20th of 1968. And then we have the canonical crimes. Both the Ripper and the Zodiac Killer have the 5 canonical victims. And then what? Pre-canonical crimes, post-canonical crimes, unconfirmed crimes that may have been attributed to this killer. And really, what I used to say in the past, Jerome, was the Zodiac Killer was a cheap 20th century Jack the Ripper knockoff. Because the Zodiac Killer is just so weak. Now,
Yeah.
Jack the Ripper was a weak person too,
Uh-huh.
but he was weak in more of a twisted, demented sense.
Yeah.
The Zodiac was more weak in a cowardly sense.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. The Zodiac was really a coward, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, Jerome, we got this one here in the chat from Andrew. If you guys could choose your top 3 suspects in no particular order for the Zodiac crimes, who would you choose? You know, Andrew, this is a Jack the Ripper live stream, so I got to tell you, I
Yeah.
don't have Zodiac suspects. And I'm not trying to dodge the question. I really don't. If I had to give you 3 Jack the Ripper suspects, now that I can do, because Jerome heard me when I
Do
said
it. Do
I
it
thought
now.
that maybe the Ripper is actually found within the list of 100 suspects. With the Zodiac, I don't know, guys. Okay, Jack the Ripper suspects. We have Aaron Kosminski, Jacob Levy, and we could even include somebody like Francis Thompson based on profiling. Francis Thompson is the subject of the book Jack the Poet, was Francis Thompson, Jack the Ripper by Simon Webb, and Jack the Ripper, the works of Francis Thompson by Richard Patterson. And there's lots of media about them online. Francis Thompson is someone who also closely matches the psychological profile of Jack the Ripper. In the past, I thought very highly of Charles Lechmere and also very highly of Joseph Barnett. But really, Joseph Barnett only kind of makes sense to me for the murder of Mary Kelly. But then I said, he's the person who identifies her body. He goes down on the suspect list a little
Yeah.
bit. Now, I talked about Randy Williams in this live stream. And Randy Williams, the author of Sherlock Holmes and the Autumn of Terror, he made such a convincing case about how the third victim in Jack the Ripper's crime spree, Liz Stride, was murdered by Isaac Kosabrodsky, and Louis Deemschutz covered for him. He would go on to expand his theory in one of the biggest Jack the Ripper theories that I've ever heard. Brilliant, mind you. It's brilliant. It's a very big theory. And that is that there was this Russian anarchist named Peter Kropotkin who created the concept of Jack the Ripper because the Russian Jewish anarchists were opposed to prostitution and they wanted to scare women off the streets because they thought that as anarchists, people cannot be free if they are in desperate need of money. So that's why they're selling their bodies. So what Peter Kropotkin did was he directed Louis Deemschutz, the person who was driving the horse and cart by Liz Stride's body. He directed a man in London named Louis Deemschutz to organize and manage the Ripper killings, and that the Ripper murders were committed by 3 people, Louis Deemschutz, Isaac Kosabrodsky, and Samuel Friedman. And as I previously mentioned, Samuel Friedman was the one who committed the murder of Catherine Eddowes in Mitre Square. And, the only point where I was completely on base with him for a while was that he had some very good analysis on how there's this 17-year-old named Isaac Kosabrodsky who was, at the scene of the crime with Louis Deemschutz, and that because they're both connected to the International Men's Socialist Workers Club, that thing, I always get the name wrong, that, he covered for him. That's why he made up the story about the horse shying at the scent of blood. That's how he, that's just why he would say something that was not true. And, I saw my wife on the street passed out, so I went inside the building to look for her. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
did you check to see if that was your wife first?
Yeah. Doesn't make sense.
Well, sometimes people do things that don't make sense. We have to be aware of that. I do a lot of things that don't make
Oh yeah.
sense.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that you're a killer, and like you say all the time, being weird is not a crime. So
Well, that could be a clear example of that. Just about like even the horse getting bothered by something. Maybe it wasn't the scent of blood. Maybe it was something else that bothered the
no,
horse, and
it
it's
could
not
be
immediately
a
meaning
rat.
that
So
something. Yeah.
yeah, could be anything. Yeah.
Quentin says, I think Kaminsky the barber. And as I said, yes, he's one of my top suspects. Andrew says he leans toward James Maybrick. I lean toward James Maybrick. James Maybrick is the subject of the Diary of Jack the Ripper, and a man named Michael Barrett came forward saying that he had obtained the Diary of Jack the Ripper, this 19th century diary that had allegedly been written by James Maybrick, where he confessed to have been Jack the Ripper. There are a couple of variants of the story. At one point, he says he got it from a deceased friend, and another variant of the story, his wife gave it to him as a creative project, and ultimately, Michael Barrett's marriage ended up falling apart over that. But James Maybrick was murdered, or he died under suspicious circumstances, and his wife, Florence Maybrick, goes on trial for it. And they thought that she was poisoning him with arsenic. And that case became referred to as the Eichsberg poisoning. And one theory is that this guy, Michael Barrett, wanted to write a true crime book. And the case that he chose to write about was the Eichsberg poisoning. And he had researched the James Maybrick story so extensively that he knew that the dates would match up. But okay, Andrew, you say you like James Maybrick as a suspect. If everything that has been assembled about him is true, then he would be somebody who'd be kind of like moving in and out of London, going back and forth from London to Liverpool, right? But he would have been in London on the dates of Ripper activity because of medical appointments that were kept in the medical logs. It's been a long time since I've looked at James Maybrick and I did my episode on him. If I've misstated anything, Andrew, please let me know. So, as you see, I comprehend the narrative. I have some skeptical doubts as always, but you guys
Yeah,
ask a lot of the Zodiac suspects. Jerome, you've got Zodiac suspects. I'm more like the more I know about the Zodiac case, the less I know, and it sucks.
yeah,
I wanted to tell you I know who the Zodiac is.
I do agree. I do agree. More you know, more you have. Yeah, yeah. It's crazy. It's crazy. Really crazy. Yeah, and uh, uh, yeah. I don't know if the police at the time, I'm talking about Jack the Ripper, had made not a sketch because nobody has seen, but a profile. If the police had made a profile of the killer, I don't know if you're aware about that.
You mean like a psychological profile?
Yeah, maybe not
I
upside, maybe not
Go ahead.
maybe not psychological, but a kind of profile who could lead to some people, some
Well, I can share some observations about that. Number
yeah,
one, it was widely believed that the killer was Jewish. Not only do we have the Goulston Street graffito, but we also just have the few glimpses that people caught of Jack the Ripper may have been a Jewish person, plus someone shouting the word Lipsky around the crime scene of one of the murders, meaning maybe they saw a Jewish person, as I talked previously about Israel Lipsky and the murder of Miriam Angel. But then another thing is they were thinking maybe, okay, even if he's not Jewish, maybe he's a foreigner. So it's why they believed that the Ripper was Jewish and or foreign, one or the other even. But as far as a composite sketch goes, it's my understanding that the only possible composite sketch exists on a cane that was owned by Frederick Aberline, one of the inspectors. But that was discovered in the archives, and then people are saying that maybe that wasn't really the composite of Jack the Ripper. There are a couple alternatives. Interestingly, Randy Williams, author of Sherlock Holmes and the Autumn of Terror, whom I was just talking about, believes that the person in that composite sketch on the cane, the wood carving, is Louis Deemschutz, his suspect. But there is another theory out there that it's a suspect named Dr. Alexander Petachenko. And in 2022, the media had somewhat of a field day with that particular story, saying that it was Alexander Petachenko. I might
yeah,
write a book about him, Jerome, to be very honest. I want to really follow his story, but that might be something in the distant future. But some people also think that the wooden carving of Jack Ripper isn't even the real Ripper, that it's actually a fictional character that was written in the book The Curse Upon Mitre Square, which was a contemporary book that came out. And the first book that was written about Jack the Ripper was The Curse Upon Mitre Square by J.F. Brewer, which came out in 1888. Only the third story deals with the Ripper crime in Mitre Square, the murder of Catherine Eddowes. The other stories are just like unrelated. But so the name of the character in the story is Mad Monk Martin, and they think that maybe that's not even the Ripper at all. It's a fictional character, and that these novelty canes were sold in London at the time in the 1800s, and it's just like a novelty item.
Because, like you said, if the letter was hoax, and the only time we have heard about Jack the Ripper was in the letter, there is no Jack the Ripper. There is a killer for sure, but he's never named himself Jack the Ripper like the Zodiac had named himself the Zodiac. If it's hoax letter, if
That's a great
the letter
observation.
doesn't come from the killer.
That's a great observation. And when I had the opportunity to interview Richard Jones of Jack the Ripper Tour, and as I said, the author of The London of Jack the Ripper,
Yeah,
he said, the question about, I said, who was Jack the Ripper? And he said, well, Jack the Ripper is not so much a who as it is a what. Jack the Ripper is a name that was found on a letter that was mailed to the Central News Agency.
yeah,
And that's the persona. So,
yeah. That's the persona. Yeah, yeah. Exactly like the Zodiac, creating a persona to. I don't know why, but yeah,
but he would agree with you that, like, if the killer didn't write the letters, then Jack the Ripper is just a name that's on this
yeah.
piece
It's
of
just a
paper.
name. Yeah, yeah. And people continue to focus about this name, Jack the Ripper, Jack the Ripper, Jack the Ripper. But if the letter are hoaxes, I mean, there is no Jack the Ripper. There is a killer who have killed at least five women, and but he never named himself Jack the Ripper. Because, as,
That would also support what you said. I mean, like about how the newspapers and the press are making money from this
yeah, yeah,
because the newspapers, the writers, and the reporters, they would have understood how to share a story that's going to get people's attention. Why does the Ripper story go on for 136 years? Well, the killer was never caught, but I mean, they knew how to get people's attention with this particular story.
yeah,
And there were serial killers before Jack the Ripper,
yeah.
like the Midnight Assassin, who worked in America in the
It's old.
1884, 85, and very similar crimes, but the
Yeah,
Midnight Assassin is almost unknown. So
it's true. And what do you, it's just something who comes in my mind like this. What do you know about H. Holmes?
the first episode that I ever did about Jack the Ripper on Black Box Online Radio was on the H. Holmes connection. And I
Oh,
used to
really?
do Black Box Online Radio 7 days a week, and I would make one episode a day. And I did one on H. Holmes as a serial killer.
Yeah.
And I found out that there was this Jack the Ripper connection. So I did, like H. Holmes as a Jack the Ripper suspect. It's an old black box recording where I'm not on camera or anything and not even images on the screen. It just has pink bubbles floating by. Seemed like a good idea at the time, people. But then, yeah, it's so, it's just like, it's a very wild theory about connecting these worldly events together about H. Holmes moving across the ocean and all that. Lots
Oh,
of
yeah,
Jack the
because
Ripper suspects
he,
ended
he
up
was
in
living
America.
he was living in Boston, I think.
Chicago, right?
Chicago? Oh yeah,
Where
Chicago.
he created the Hotel House of Horrors and
Yeah, yeah, you're right.
but yeah, that was the first episode that I did. And the name of the guy who promotes that theory is named Jeff Mudgett, and I believe he's a descendant of Holmes, if I remember correctly. But it's been 5 years since I've done that. But I do remember one thing: that H. Holmes episode is the best episode of Black Box Online Radio that I've ever done on the H. Holmes Jack the Ripper connection. I'm not even sure why, just personal preference, I suppose.
Oh, really? I'm sorry to have forgot that, but like you said, it was 5 years ago, and you have made so much show, then I forget that it was on your show.
Oh, sure, yes, and there are more than 1,000 episodes of Black Box Online Radio,
Oh yeah,
almost 2,000, approaching that milestone. I don't have a lot to show for it, but you know, um, still going strong. And I said, there's so much material to explore because I'm
yeah.
a relative newcomer to the Jack Ripper case. Even though I did an episode about the Ripper 5 years ago, I've really only closely followed the Ripper for 2 years. I made lots of episodes in 2021, but that's like a couple months here and there. In total, I've only looked at the Ripper case for about 2 years, so I don't know everything. And
No, no, for sure.
with the Zodiac case, I've followed it for 8 years. Nothing like you, Jerome, 23 years or something, right? But
Yeah,
you must have learned like after 2 years, you start to change. 4 years, you start to change. 8 years,
exactly.
you start to change. And you think differently about the case, analyzing the
Absolutely.
facts and the
More
stories,
you learn, more you change your mind. Yeah.
and like I frequently quote Brian Davis from the Tate LaBianca radio program. I know you listen to that show too, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And he said that in a true crime case, it takes 4 years to learn who the people are. And he
Oh,
doesn't mean
yeah.
their names. You can learn their names in 6 months if you dedicate yourself to it. To learn who they are. Are they a good person or a bad person? Is this a truth teller or is this a liar? I mean,
I did agree 100%.
I do
Absolutely.
too.
It took a lot of times. Yeah, yeah, I know.
So with
I know.
Jack the Ripper, I fully told you guys at the beginning I'm not an expert. I'm not even a ripperologist. I'm just I'm a commentator. I talk about things that I find particularly books, videos, podcasts, documentaries, news articles. And as we've seen 2022, 2023, 2024, the news is still coming out about Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, but like I was saying in the beginning of the show, for me, you was the more knowledgeable people to talking about Jack the Ripper, and that's why I asked you to, if you will agree to do a show with me about about him, and you did. So
Anytime, Jerome.
thank you. I already told you it's always an honor to have you and Drusser, Drew Bison, Russ Gerasi, Richard Grenell. And on Monday we will have a new our show, episode
Of
6.
course.
Yeah, and we will have a new guest, Edward. I don't know if you have seen that in the chat early.
No, who's Edward?
Edward, it's somebody that Druser and Richard knows very well, and he's on this case. I think for years and years and years, and he know a lot, and I think he's more focused. But I'm not sure. But I think he's more focused on DNA stuff.
Do you mean Edward Barsh?
Maybe I don't know because it's just a pseudonym on Discord. So, but his name is Edward, but not Edward EDW. It's EDURARD. So
No
it's
idea.
on our on our Discord group created by a friend of Druser and Richard, and he will be there on Monday with us to talking about the Zodiac. So it will be great to have a new guest.
Yes, that's
So
good. And I do want to get to some of these things in the chat here because Andrew WVA says, I recommend The Devil in White City by Eric Larson. It covers Holmes in the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. All right, sure, Andrew. I'm always taking recommendations. I would love to read that about Holmes and get more into his story again. It's been a while. But the one under that as well, I wanted to respond to, Jerome. Haynes Antony says, it's problematic to apply rationality to the irrational. Okay, Jerome, do you remember what I was saying about Inspector Mark Rowley and John
yeah,
Douglas? You asked me, what did I think about John Douglas saying, you got to put yourself in the shoes of the killer? And Mark Rowley disagreed with that. This is
yeah,
the best way to encapsulate that. Way better than anything that I said. Haynes Anthony, congratulations to you. Good stuff. I mean it. It's problematic to apply rationality to the irrational. That's what that guy was saying when he's like, you're not going to be thinking the same way that the killer is. What he means is you're going to be thinking in a rational way. The killer might be thinking in an irrational way because of some type of psychosis fueled incident or episode. And somebody once told me in psychosis, there is no logic. Or even from
no,
the point where this person is dealing with emotional trauma to a much larger degree. Maybe you can comprehend trauma in a logical sequence, but a lot of these mental disorders, perhaps not. And it goes beyond that. Like even like let's talk about the effects of syphilis on the brain. Jack the Ripper, we deal with that all the time. The
yeah.
effects of epilepsy on the brain. All of this stuff could be tying into things. Great comment. Haynes Anthony.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'm watching
All
in
right,
the
anything else
chat.
you wanted to go over, Jerome?
What?
Is there anything else you wanted to go over?
Uh, no, I think we have talked a lot about that, except if you want to add some observation or some stuff that you want to talk about.
Not exactly. It's just, as I said, I've had the opportunity to interview Richard Jones of the Jack the Ripper tour, and he's followed the Ripper case for 44 years, and he just says, we're never going to know the truth. And he's accepted that. And
Yeah,
that gives me not exactly optimism, but I recognize that we might not ever know the truth about Jack the Ripper. I would still keep following the case because we could find it, and also we have this window into Victorian England, and we learn about so many true crime stories along the way. We learn about British history along the way. So I definitely would keep going, partnered with the fact that there's so many pieces of fiction and poetry about Jack the Ripper. As I said, the Ripper is even a Sherlock Holmes villain. Villain.
yeah.
So I definitely would keep exploring this. And every Wednesday, I do a segment about Jack the Ripper on Black Box Online Radio, my YouTube channel, and that's called Ripper Wednesday. Every Monday, I talk about the Zodiac Killer, and every Friday about DB Cooper. And for the early autumn, the autumn of terror, if you will, I'll be coming live to you guys every Tuesday and Thursday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning with me, Black Box Ned Dahan. So lots of things on YouTube, and you can hit the like button and subscribe for Jerome. You can also go over and visit my YouTube channel if you want to hear more about all of these true crime cases. And True Crime Talk Radio is going to be a segment where I'm really going to focus more on things like forensics, criminology, and psychology, and people can ask whatever they want in the chat, like you guys did right here. You guys are all amazing in the audience. Thank you so much. Thanks
Oh
again for
yeah.
having me, Jerome.
Thank you very much, and thank you again, Snad. You are really incredible. Always.
All right, Jerome.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Have a good one too. And thank you everybody in the chat. Let's see you on Monday, and have a good weekend. So peace and stay true.